See the grasshoppers?
Yeah, exactly. See the migration of the grasshoppers.
Yeah. See the grasshopper invasion? Yeah.
So, then we would sit here and come back for give it up to Monday, Tuesday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. We would skip around and come back.
I'm sure you could save on flights and everything else.
Right.
Are you going to be using
I will not be
Next
using
year,
it.
is something that came to us after we
Family vacation?
Work the first time, and then my
That's the one. Yeah. And where? Yeah, my sister. Yeah, my sister lives not far from San Jose. And that's way up there.
Yeah, almost see
About 6 hours from LA.
Yeah.
5 hours from LA. He's going up.
All right, guys, we'll get the show on the road. Thank you for being here tonight. My name is Rich Jones. I'm the CEO of Favor Greenville and Favor Anderson and Favor Spartanburg and the other organizations and affiliates that we're trying to get going. I haven't been here for a while. I missed a few. I've been traveling a lot of different stuff going on. This whole issue around addiction and the awareness with addiction and recovery and everything like that. It's good in a sense because the attention that it's getting, it's driving a lot of requests, driving a lot of people who want to have information. It's bad in a sense because on any given day of the week, I don't know where I am and who I'm talking to and whether I've said the same joke or not, right? So I'm talking to different groups and I say this thing and I'm like, I think I tried that joke already. So I'm pretty sure I know where I am tonight. And I also want to take a minute right at the beginning and see what it is that you guys want to talk about. It's interesting trying to figure out how to do these family groups and what we should be talking about and what we shouldn't be talking about. And I tend to open every group with going through the basics, but I don't want to do that unless we need to do that. I don't want to get redundant. I want to try to open it up and see what you guys might want to talk about. If you don't have anything, I'll go through some stuff and we'll try to figure out where to go with it. But does anybody have a burning desire or an issue or anything that they're dealing with that they feel like they want to get some questions answered? Anything I can help you figure out based on my experiences, based on some of the stuff that I've come across over the last 20 years, if you will. Anybody got anything that, and if not, that's fine too. So, anybody here for the first time? Does everybody feel like they understand the basics around addiction? How does a person become addicted? What's the difference? How do we know? All that kind of stuff. So I don't necessarily need to go there. What about around options and what do we do if so okay, I know what addiction is, Rich. That's really cool. It's a brain disease. I get it. It's shifted. That's cool. What do we do about it? Do you feel like you have an idea of what recovery is and what the options are there? And how do you feel about that part of the equation? We good with that, or we? Are you watching the thing on there right now? Are you watching this presentation on your phone?
No, she's watching SNN.
That you're violating some kind of like sacred principle right there.
When you talk about options, the thing that bothers me is there's really not a lot of options unless you have a lot of money.
So there aren't a lot of so when we talk about options, there are two different ways to think about it. What are the options if you have all the money in the universe or all the insurance in the universe, right? That's the one thing. And then the second thing is, what are my options in terms of the person that I love willingness, right? Because you got to remember, you can have all the money in the world, but you still might not be able to get the person to do anything. So the first scenario, what do you do if you don't have resources? That is a very, very real problem. I mean, we face that all day, every day. And where do I send them? How do I get them in? Is there a waiting list? What do I do while a person's on a waiting list? How do I manage that? And I could stand up here and try to sell you something on that, but I gotta tell you, there's no good answer for that, right? We're literally dealing with this today with a person who was in the emergency room all night last night, just about as bad shape as you possibly can imagine in terms of his physical health, right? This stuff deteriorates over time. It takes you out, emotionally and spiritually and psychologically and then physically as well. And the worst possible scenario you can imagine, head injury, all that kind of stuff, and we can't find a place to get them in. It gets real complicated. You start trying to put together the best plan you can, even though it's not ideal. A couple of principles I will tell you about that, though. Sometimes people get better despite not having an ideal plan. Would you guys agree with that? So sometimes people get better. So for example, they've done studies of people on a waiting list, and people have gotten better while they were on a waiting list. There is something to be said about readiness in a person's mindset. And you'll hear people talk, if I'm ready and I'm really willing to do this, I can kind of get it no matter what. So you can start to focus on what can I do to help get the person to that point, right? Regardless of what the resources are. If you need free resources, there are places that people can go in South Carolina, and that's why we have coaches, and that's why we have people to talk to, because they're not advertising, they're not out there talking about it because they don't necessarily have room at the inn. But there are places that you can try to get. You can also go out of state. There are certain places out of state that you can find that are a little more affordable, but I agree with you. It's not. Does anyone have any hidden rehabs anywhere that they would want to let us know about? I will tell you that I heard about this past week. I did come across like a straight mental health program that I didn't know existed, and it's in Charlotte. It's called Hopeway. And what was interesting about that experience and that conversation, it came up among drug and alcohol providers, but I didn't know that there was a straight residential mental health program. It's called Hopeway. It's just outside of Charlotte, and that would be if you were dealing with somebody who had, they might have some substance use going on, but it would be stronger on the mental health end. So the other thing is, how do you even keep up with the resources on it? As soon as I think I know every recovery house or every situation, then you find out that there's another one that just popped up on the corner, and you don't know whether it's good, you don't know whether it's bad. You have to be very, very selective around all those things. Does anyone have any advice on how to handle that? Has anyone gone through that or share any similar experiences with that process?
I mean, that's something I'd like to know more about, because, I mean, our daughter now is in a place that basically they're either coming out of jail, out of prison, or they're still, they're just almost in active addiction coming in to this house, and she's 4.5 months clean. Yeah. And so she just is like, I gotta get out of here. I gotta find someplace else. Well, I said, go for it. You have to find it. Right. Because we have done our boundary thing a lot. Yeah. And she did. And so today, but the differences between them, I have no idea. Now maybe she just found the first one on her phone and said, I'm getting out of here. And
it's a great question. So if you think about, if you go through, let's start with residential. Let's just say someone needs a place to live, all right? The most trustworthy places, or the places where, trustworthy may be the wrong way to say it, the most predictable places are licensed inpatient programs. These are actually medically licensed programs that are paid for by insurance. The reason why they're a little bit easier to predict is because, there's a body coming in there looking at them and regulating them and saying you have to meet these credentials. Not that you can meet those credentials and still be knuckleheads. Do you follow? But it's harder to be a knucklehead through that process. Those are usually, what is that sound? Oh, okay, all right. So I thought I've heard it like 4 times. I didn't want to say anything because I thought maybe I was the only one hearing it. I was like, I don't want to, because no one else reacted. We were here with all the volunteers and stuff. Like everybody it sounds like a cat in an engine or something. So you have, if you look at the inpatient side, what's the downside to inpatient? It costs more money. All right. and or insurance has to pay for it. And it's tough sometimes to get it approved. In terms of free inpatient programs, you really are limited to like Morris Village. You might be able to look around other parts of the state and you can get detoxed at places like Charleston Center, the Phoenix Center, but there aren't a lot of free inpatient.
But we're talking like sober living homes after they get out of
Yes.
like a Morris Village.
Yes, and so you got that. Think of that as one thing. Then you have this thing called recovery residences, which are completely misunderstood, and there's technically 4 levels of recovery residence. So a level 4 recovery residence would be something like the Owl's Nest, or Salvation Oaks, or Shalom House. Those are not inpatient programs. They are not licensed by any medical program, and they won't take insurance. But they are technically recovery residences level 4 because they're very restrictive. You don't get to go anywhere. Do you guys get that part? You have to stay on campus. It feels like rehab. Level 3 is what most people think of when they think of a sober living. You're in the program, we want you to get a job, we want you to go get a sponsor, we want you to go to meetings on your own, you're kind of independent, but you're still having staff supervision. Technically the definition of level 3 is 24-hour awake staff supervision, meaning that there's somebody who's not a resident, this is very important, not another resident, somebody who's paid. Rich is in there, Lee's in there, and it's our job to be awake while everyone else is in bed and making sure people come in at night. That's level 3. Level 2 is the same deal, but there's not 24-hour staff. There'll usually be like one staff who's paid that goes in, and then level 1 is literally no staff. It's 100% peers. And in Oxford House is a very good example of level 1. We vote on everything. Nobody's in charge. No staff members. And what you have is that you have decreasing costs, okay? But you have increasing risks, right? So why is that? As there's less staff, there's more freedom. As there's more freedom, there's more temptation. And you can, I always said this when I ran recovery houses, you can do the wrong thing if you want. Whereas if I get you in my rehab, you're not going to get high. You follow that? Like, you're in here, nobody's coming in, you're not leaving, I'm not sending you off to the community to go get a job. So that's the risk around that. And there's no regulation of recovery houses. Do you guys get that part? There's 0 regulation. If you wanted to, you could open one tonight. And that is why you have this wide variety in results. That's why your daughter was in the situation she was in, and she was saying, this is crazy. Get me out of here, because, I mean, that's just, you'll hear crazy stories, man, about stuff going on in those situations. And then you'll have really good ones.
I think theirs must be a level 2 because there's medication is kind of manned.
Okay.
You have to ask for your medication.
Yes.
If you want anything.
But there's no 24-hour.
Yeah.
Yeah, if there's no 24-hour, and you can imagine like the no 24-hour thing can get squirrely, right? Because that's where if people wanted to, they could leave at night, come back, and that's where you'll start to hear stories about, oh, everybody's using it in the house or something like that. Here are some things to ask, though. If you're helping your loved one, or if you want to get with a coach and get more information, some of the questions you can ask even around level 2. So like if it's a level 2 house, is drug testing being conducted on a regular basis? How do we know, are there any kind of random checks at night? Whenever I ran level 2 houses, we would still do random checks. So we had a level 3 house that was maybe about a mile away from a level 2 house, and the staff at level 3 would drive over to level 2. And you would find people wouldn't be there all the time, right? And it's hilarious. It's hilarious. Because then you would come in the next day and you would do like your meeting and you'd be like, yeah, was everybody in last night? Oh, yeah. And they'd be like, oh, yeah, man, it was a great night. We watched Monday Night Football, And then what I would do is I would timestamp a picture and put it in I would timestamp a note and put it in the drawer in the kitchen, okay? And have them go pull that out. And it would be like me saying, where were you guys, right? And so it would be like from the night before. And they would not one of those times did people cop to actually not being there. Do you follow what I'm saying? Like never. So the problem is that the honor system is supposed to drive the day in the level 2s, in the level 1s. But here's what's interesting, guys. When level 2s and level 1s were invented, they were invented for more mature clients. They tended, it used to be called halfway houses. You guys, anybody ever hear the term halfway houses? Halfway houses were literally halfway home from rehab or halfway home from jail. You're not completely home, and it tended to be guys and girls who were older and more mature and more motivated. And so you could turn your back for a little bit. Does that make sense? And you didn't have to be as nervous as it is now. But now we have, because addiction is what pushing down the age, we have people that are younger and younger winding up. I think this is what's interesting about this, and I think you handled that very well. You can get from one house to another, though. There are enough of them out there that if you're having a bad experience, you typically can find another place
She
to
had to
go.
wait a little while, but she got it.
Yeah,
So have you heard of Sober Living America?
I have.
Greenville?
I have. And I've heard so much different stuff, and I'll tell you what, I've heard so much different stuff about the same house. In other words, depending on who was there, like who the other residents were, I've heard great stuff, I've heard horrible stuff, I'll be perfectly honest, like I can't even make sense of it. You know what I mean? Like I don't know who's telling the truth or what's going down. And I do know that there have been times whenever it wasn't good. It wasn't good. Is that the one she wanted to move out of? Or
No, that's what she's moving into.
Okay, all right.
It's like an apartment, but with one other roommate. Where
Yeah.
before she was in a house that had like 8 beds in a room that
Yeah.
she was with.
Right.
So
She
Right.
said step by step right now.
Okay, I know that one, and I could see that. I could see what you're talking about there. Absolutely,
You could
100%.
have level 2s and level 3s that are all different.
Yeah.
It could be good in the level 3 or terrible.
Here, yeah, and there's a lot of bad press and a lot of bad juju around recovery houses because people just can do the wrong thing if they want to. There's no regulation, there's no oversight. There's no one coming in to check the records. There's no one coming in to check the finances. There's no one coming in to do any of that stuff. And we're trying to get that changed in South Carolina. There's a national organization called the National Association of Recovery Residences that's trying to bring a chapter in here and get that tightened up a little bit. But right now it's the wild, wild west.
So it all depends on the individuals, how straight they want to fly.
That's right. And I think what you said to your daughter, though, is what I would say to somebody in a situation like that. Because here's the deal. You got to go into this with your eyes wide open. It's as you said, man, there aren't a lot of options sometimes. So you're going to go in here, and if you can make it work, you're going to make it work. And if you can't, there's probably another one over here. You have to find a way to maintain your boundaries and maintain your plan, if you will, despite this fact that there's less than ideal conditions. If you wait until the ideal conditions are here to kind of like start to set boundaries and want to see something different, you're going to be waiting forever. You'll see this a lot with inpatient programs too, especially with people who may be exposed to this issue the first time. They'll be looking for the perfect program. They'll be looking for the perfect situation where this program addresses, alcohol, pills, and trauma, and depression and anxiety, and so they'll be looking for all this stuff, and they're going on the websites and they're first of all, what you see on the websites may or may not be true. That's the first thing. And secondly, unless you know for sure that there's a heavy duty like trauma, okay, or some other just well-documented depression issue, whatever, I'm telling you, they're all going to basically do the same thing. They're all going to do the same thing. The rehab is going to put you in a bubble where you cannot get out, and you're going to get 30 days to get your head together. And you're going to start, the light's going to start flickering on at the end of the 30 days. You get that? Like, you're going to start thinking a little bit clearer. And then sober living is going to be like, get in here, get your act together, get a job, keep your head down. We will support you. You will have under good conditions, a safe place to sleep. But we want you to be in the world learning how to do this. And essentially, it doesn't get much different than that. You'll go on websites and they'll be like equine therapy, acupuncture, yoga on the beach, gourmet chef and stuff like that. I do not recommend you buy into the bells and whistles of that stuff. That's just differentiators that people are trying to use to get you to come to their center. You want a solid place where people are going to be safe. You want a solid place where people are going to be treated okay. In sober living, you want a place where people are going to be safe. This response, I do want to kind of like talk about that a little bit longer, because this comes up all the time where families get a call from so-and-so at the house. I can't be here anymore. This is ridiculous. The danger is you can't go rescue, right? If you go rescue the person in that situation, you also are stepping into a mess. So you have to be careful. It's not clear what to do in a situation like that. Call, get some advice, or if you're going to say, I'll help you get out of there, get them into another program. Don't bring them back home just for the sake of that, because you're bringing them back into a mess, or with their friends, or be back into the same behaviors. How do you keep somebody from using when they're not like on lockdown? That's the dilemma, right? I did recovery houses. I did a tour duty in recovery houses for about 13 months. I'll never go back. I will not do it again. Everybody's like, why doesn't Favor Greenville do that? I'll be like, we are a community-based service. I cannot be on the hook for people. I'll do a rehab again, but I cannot be on the hook for people who have the ability to go out and get high if they want to, right? It's tough, man. And I don't even know what to say about some of the ones that aren't going really well. I think you have two different ways for them not to go well. One is we're trying to do the right thing and they're still not going well. The other is we don't really give a crap and we're just going to give it, pay your rent and you're good to go. You can deal with this one probably, right? Because it can improve, but this one over here you want to run from. And you have to kind of help your loved one probably make that decision, or coaches have to help them. It's not easy. It's not easy at all.
There's no regulation for drug testing in any of them?
There's no regulation that says you have to do anything.
But some of them do.
Some of them do. And one of the things to do if you're in a situation and somebody's looking for sober living would be to ask those questions. Do you drug test? Why do you not drug test? What are your other programming expectations? What do they have to do in a day? Here's an interesting idea. One of the studies, or one of the ways to know whether or not it's an active recovery house and whether it's a good recovery house is what do they do during the day? Because it's tough if all they're doing is playing video games and chilling during the day, right? So the requirements, you want to find a place that says what? You got to get a job, right? You got to go to meetings, or you got to go to therapy, or you got to go volunteer. People need to be active during the day. That's another thing that you could look for. How do they handle medication is another thing. Are the meds supervised? Do they keep them locked up in a room, or they let the residents take care of it themselves? There are different things you can ask that can make you more secure. I will tell you guys that there are recovery houses everywhere, and you got to look close, and you probably can find recovery houses we don't even know about because they are unregulated, right? They can pop up. I know for sure I do not know the recovery houses in Anderson. I do not know them. You want to ask questions, you want to look around, you want to ask staff here. There are places for people to go. When we get down to it, there are places where they can go and they can get in and they can start working it off too. Do you guys know that? There are places that isn't the best situation, but they'll take rich up front with no money, and then I'll have to work it off. I'm not saying that's good. That some people call that indentured servitude, but technically I can go somewhere, even if I don't have money. Even if I don't have money. What else would we add about recovery houses? Anybody else want to share anything about their experience or any suggestions they would have along the way? How to handle it, what to look for? Most recovery houses, yes ma'am?
Maybe if they're part of a larger recovery house organization like Oxford House.
So Oxford House is a national organization that can help you.
Oversight and some leadership,
Yeah.
and some structure. And
Interesting. Oxford houses, though, are the classic halfway house model where there's zero supervision, and other than people will it's a democratically run program, so there'll be a peer leader among them, but they're not technically staff. I tell you what I would look for. It would be other people in the house. Does that make sense? So if you get the right group of people in a house, any house is good. If you get the wrong group of people in a house, any house is horrible. What do I mean by wrong group of people? People who are using, people who don't have their head in the game, people who are promoting the wrong type of behavior. And that's something that the person won't figure out until they get there. So we kind of have a default setting that if we need to move people, we move them. this experience with her needing to move is not uncommon at all.
I mean, she did it on, and when she found
Yeah.
her own place, I mean, because we told her, well, okay, if you don't like it there, then
Yep.
you're gonna have to do something.
Yes, it's very, very common because you get in there, you can't tell when you get there, but once you're there for a little bit, you can see like this is not. There's some negative vibes in this building, and this
She
is
just feels like she's constantly getting talked down to,
yes,
like she's like a,
Yep.
no, nothing.
yes, and nobody wants that. We are still absolutely, without question, working through decades of you're a drug addict, shut up and go get your help. You get like the stigma and the approach. Even when I got clean 19 years ago, I'm telling you, like the place that I went, it was not, they had a thing called work therapy. Tell me what that is, right? There is no such, I found out later after I went to grad school, like there is no such thing as work therapy. I was like, there's this thing out there called work therapy. They're like, that sounds like you were a slave, dude. That's not like actual like a therapy, right? Like, and so they were mean, and they were like it was this idea of I'm gonna like belittle you and then build you up. It's kind of like let me break through denial, let me belittle you and build and knock you down because you have been arrogant and you've been puffed up. And I get that because sometimes people do that, but that is no way to run programs, right? It's just no way to do it. And so we're still working through that. So what do you do as a parent or a loved one if you get that call? It doesn't mean you rescue, but probably in your mind you're sort of like, there's probably something to this. Do you guys get that part? And you have to figure out what do you say to them, because if you say like, yeah, you're right, I know you're right. I just heard Rich talk at the group, and yeah, we know. What are they going to do? They're going to run with that. Come get me now. So you have to figure out a way to play it down the middle. We recommend, hey, you can get yourself into a program because that's what they can do because the options are there. We have a huge resource list, guys, on the Favor Greenville website that you pull it down and you can pull down residential and you can pull down sober living, and we have, everything you can imagine. It's a PDF, you can print it out, you can give it to your loved one, they can start there. You can empower them to try to make the decisions and make the choices. What other thoughts on that part of the process? All right, so what other great topic, great model or great program or plan that approach with your daughter? That was a great way of going about it. I just say great 17 times. Yes?
Can you talk a little bit about MAT?
Yeah, absolutely. So does everyone know what MAT stands for? Medication-assisted treatment, right? So medication-assisted treatment it's primarily right now being employed where opioids are concerned. So medication-assisted treatment is used to prevent people from going through withdrawal and to minimize cravings. It is primarily two different medications. One is methadone, the other is called buprenorphine, and in two different forms. One is Suboxone and one is called Subzol. Subutex as well, Suboxone and Subutex. And what's the difference? Methadone, you have to get it at a clinic. You have to go in every day. You have to be in a licensed OTP, outpatient opioid treatment program. Suboxone, buprenorphine, you can get it from a doctor in a doctor's office. Okay, so this is preferred. This is used a lot more. Now go on the record, understand that this is only for opioids, right? You can't, like if your loved one's saying, I've been on methamphetamine, I need to get on Suboxone, like that doesn't compute, right? Like that doesn't happen. So, do you have any specific questions about it, or?
My daughter is, she has a plan to go to a doctor and get Suboxone. She doesn't want to be on it, but just a few months.
Yeah.
She knows after that, she's going to need to go into at least the 30-day program.
Yes, so the first thing is we wholeheartedly support her doing that, and we would say, go do it today. And the reason is because, especially in today's world with these escalated issues around overdoses and some of these Frankenstein drugs that are out there, so we're, if anyone is thinking about it, we're like, go do it, right? It's going to take away the withdrawal, it's going to stabilize the situation, and when we talk to people, we try to get them to just look at what you need to do today. Don't even worry about what you're going to do 2 months from now or 3 months from now. We just want to get you on this because this is going to take you off the street getting all that other stuff. Do you guys get that part? How it works is, I don't know if do we have any markers? Because we can, best way to talk about this is to draw it. I have a marker here.
He's got one.
I found it. It's like a little kid's marker, but it'll work. All right, so think of this right here. This is an opioid, and it's called a full. We'll do this. This is a receptor, mu receptor, and the way that opioids work is they bind to this receptor, and that's what takes away pain, but that's also what gets you high. Okay, and this is called a full agonist when it binds to the receptor completely. And that's what Percocet does. That's what Oxycontin does. That's what heroin does, okay? Did you get that part? And what happens is over time, literally your body becomes assimilated to this and dependent on this. You become, if you don't have it and it's not there, you go through withdrawal. So we'll start with methadone. Methadone is also a full agonist. So it also fully binds, and you don't go through withdrawal and you don't have craving, but it is released over a long period of time. It's really only used if there's a high level of use. It's used for people who've been using for a while. It's not frontline stuff for somebody. It's very, very powerful, but it's very long acting. So the deal is you can't overdose on it. If you're prescribed, if you're opioid tolerant, you're not going to overdose on it, and it'll take away the craving. What's interesting is buprenorphine or Suboxone is called a partial agonist, so it half binds. So you don't get the full effect. That's the first thing. You could say like it gets you half high. Does that make sense? But you still get the effect that it mitigates the withdrawal. And that's why this can be given in an office, and this is why you have to go to a clinic here. Do you guys get that part? And so the deal is, there really is no controversy with medication-assisted treatment when people do it the way they're supposed to. The problem is people will sometimes not do it the way they're supposed to, just like sometimes people won't do any treatment the way they're supposed to. So if you go and you get Suboxone and you take it only whenever you don't have other drugs, or you use it to sell to other people or trade for other things, or you use it in combination with other things, that is highly problematic, right? That's a big deal. But if you take it the way you're supposed to, you will not suffer withdrawal, you're not going to go out and seek the other substances, and then you can figure out what you want to do down the road. We would always recommend that a person on MAT, though, also becomes involved in other types of programming. In an ideal world, coming to groups and stuff like that. Yes?
What about the role Vivitrol can play?
The what?
The role Vivitrol.
Yeah, I'm going to get into that. I'm going to talk about Vivitrol for sure, because there are a couple other medications as well you can use.
So I have a question about those programs, AA and NA, and those programs who, I think there are some who say if you're on medically assisted treatment, you're not really clean.
Yeah, so there is, you'll see that stuff. And if your daughter's going to those meetings, she'll feel like a second-class citizen. What I can tell you about that is it's just wrong. It's just 100% wrong, but those groups, you got to remember, those groups are voluntary groups with no oversight, and it's just people kind of talking about what they sort of know, right? They've never had that conversation ever before. And she would have to take that into account and into consideration. And we would encourage things like our all recovery meeting. If somebody at our all recovery meeting, well, if a staff member at our all recovery meeting says that, we'll ask the staff member to not be part of Favor Anderson anymore. We will not tolerate that. That is not the case, guys. That is not. This is where your daughter wants to go. Like, we want her to be okay, period. You guys get that? That's the Favor Anderson philosophy. We want you to be okay. And you know what? What you're doing on day one of your recovery may not be the same thing you're doing 3 months from now or 6 months. I'm not doing the same thing today that I was doing back then. But you're not going to, whenever you go to voluntary mutual support groups like 12-step meetings or other meetings like that, they don't have anybody in charge. Does that make sense? And so they can say kind of like whatever they want. And her deal would be, can she not throw the baby out with the bathwater? So is there a way to get her not to reject groups just because she had a bad experience at groups? But man, we have heard that a million times. We've had people be told to get off of medication, and we've had to step in and say, stay on it. You can't just quit this stuff. You're going to go into full-blown withdrawal, and you're going to be using. And in today's world, I mean, the stakes get higher because you don't know what you're taking on any given day, or you don't know what might happen, which is why get on it, get stabilized, start talking to somebody, start coming to groups here, get a coach, start to figure it out, and and then you'll start to get better. Here's what we say about coming off of Suboxone. It's not about time. So what I would say to your daughter is this isn't about how long you're on it. It's about life circumstances when you come off. Does that make sense, guys? There are times when it's better to transition than others. You want to come off of something like that when you're stable, whenever you're feeling okay. Do you know what I mean? Like whenever life is kind of okay, then you start to make decisions. You probably got to get on it and get your head together for a little bit before you can even figure that out. We support it 100%. So in addition to these, though, there is also a medication called Vivitrol. It's actually naloxone. Naloxone is delivered by pill or by injection, and Vivitrol is injection. And what that does is it blocks the receptor. Do you guys get that? Is called an antagonist, meaning you can't get to the receptor. So you have to be clean though to get on that. You guys get that part? You can't. It's weird. You can only get on Vivitrol if you're already off of everything else, because it's going to throw you into withdrawal. So Vivitrol is typically only used on the back end of rehab. Vivitrol is about $1,100 a month too, because it's a monthly shot. It's typically not covered by insurance. It doesn't get used as often. There's also a medication called Antabuse, which is for alcohol. How many people have heard of Antabuse? Anybody here ever drink on Antabuse? I did. It was like giving birth to The Exorcist. It was the worst experience of my life. It is meant to make you so sick that you'll never want to drink again. And it did. But the problem is it only works if you take it. Right? So you quickly realize, well, I'm never going to take that again. So that's also technically medication-assisted treatment. Is anyone aware, am I missing any other medication-assisted treatment that they can think of?
I mean, there's different methods of delivery for the same medications. I mean, there's an implant with a naltrexone implant, the tablets and other things. And I think in like clinical stuff, if they're testing for naltrexone, you can't test for naltrexone, so they put like B vitamins or they put some other supplement in it. So then when you go through your program and they're testing to see if you're taking your meds the way you're supposed to.
If you were taking it orally, because you can take it orally as well.
They test for that and not the actual naloxone.
So you can take some of this other medicine different ways.
But
Buprenorphine is probably going to be though like sublingual. It'll probably be a strip. I don't know. Does anyone know of anybody who's doing a buprenorphine implant in Anderson? I don't even know of anybody in Greenville doing it. You can technically get it put in where it will release it slowly over time. And the reason to do that would be, the person's getting it, that he's not going to be abusing it or selling it or whatever.
have the rules changed for methadone as far as whether or not you can take them? Because I'm like 10 years ago, like my husband, he would walk out of a dirty doctor with a giant handful, a giant script of methadone, a giant script of Xanax, and a giant script of 80s. So did the rules change, or was that just the
he was getting it obviously he was at a regular doctor, right?
He went to a pain clinic with a
Yeah, so this is it's a great, I'm glad you got to remember, methadone is technically pain medication.
Right.
So he was getting it not at an OTP. An OTP is an opioid treatment program.
True.
So if you go to a pain doctor and he gives you methadone, you get all the take-homes you want.
Yeah.
That's how people overdose, though.
Yeah.
If you are on it because you were on heroin or you were on other hard pain pills, then you're only going to go in every day. Does that make sense, guys? You can use all these drugs for other things. Even buprenorphine was originally a pain med. And so the deal is, I guess it's like very similar to the recovery house. Who you go see as the prescriber and who is the provider for the medication-assisted treatment or for the pain meds. That is just as important as the recovery house. Who are the providers around here? Have you found a doctor? Do you know?
She's in North Carolina.
She's in North Carolina, okay.
Right. She has found a place there. I looked it up online. It is a physician, but it's called Connection something. It's also kind of a clinic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do they charge $300 every office visit?
Probably.
Or stuff, cash only, and no insurance? The insurance might cover the bed, but it won't cover the doctor because it's $300
Well, she doesn't have insurance quite yet. She has a job, but her insurance hasn't kicked in, but she found a program that without insurance, they'll pay for that.
Okay.
The only thing they won't pay for is the prescription,
Oh.
and they called and made her appointment for her.
So you have a very, very aggressive initiative in across some states to try to get people access to medication-assisted treatment. So that's why you're seeing it. It hasn't hit here yet like that.
Is there any requirement for these places that deliver the MAT to require them to try to get them help to wean them off?
No, there's no requirement. It's like any other medication. And you come in, you get it. There are recommendations, okay? There are recommendations for counseling. There are recommendations for support groups. There are recommendations for, mental health therapy if you have a co-occurring mental health, but there are not requirements. And there's a lot of controversy around this. And the idea would be that the doctor's job, okay? So, and it's this conversation is very specific to opioids, and it's very specific to the context of what we're dealing with right now as a country, right? 70,000 people dying of overdoses. So you guys get that part? This is, this would not be the case 5 years ago or 10 years ago. The deal is that he's a doctor, he prescribes it, it's her job to figure out what else she needs. Just like a diabetic gets insulin, and it's his job to figure out what else he needs to do to eat right and go to a nutritionist and go exercise. That's the theory around this, and that they're moving toward to try to increase access. Therefore, Ruth Ann, there would be nobody saying anything particular other than, like, what were you using, when were you using, and here's the amount we're going to start you on.
So you can stay on it for 5 years. You can continue to go into a clinic and stay on it forever and pay that price. And
So you can stay on that.
money.
Yeah, it would be technically a maintenance drug. Okay, so if you go back, guys, but what's really important is if you're dealing with somebody, if there's one takeaway and you're dealing with opioids, I wouldn't even get into that with her. Do you follow what I'm saying? I would encourage her to talk to a coach or somebody about that. Do you guys understand? Like, just get her on it and get her stable. Recovery freaks people out to begin with. Like, well, what am I going to be doing a year from now? What am I going to be doing a month from now? Just for today, you're going to get on this and you're going to be okay. The long-term implications of that my experience has been, is that people start to talk to people along the way. And it's not the doctor that really ever initiates this. It's through conversations with other people. It's through conversations with people that they meet at recovery meetings. It's through conversations with therapists. The doctors, and I've learned a lot about this, on all kinds of different levels, they really can't go there. There really is no protocol for coming off. Do you get that part?
Right.
So if you're a
The
doctor...
reason I ask this is because I have a family member that's been on methadone for over 5 years.
Yeah.
And because of favor, I've come to accept it. I would rather it be that
Yep.
than the heroin.
That's right.
So, a year ago, though, I was frustrated with how can they do that?
Yeah.
How can a doctor that is supposed to be out there helping somebody allow that to continue to go on for that length of time?
That's right.
It really is a money racket, but when you weigh out the two things, I'd rather that be that than heroin.
Well, so, and exactly, and you start to get into this situation where you say to yourself, like, if a person's still breathing, they will start to figure things out, and I've seen countless times people start to make different decisions, that kind of stuff. And people live life in different ways. They live life in different ways, and they may not get to the level that you hoped and dreamed that they would get to, right? And they may not be doing recovery the way that I did recovery, but honestly, like, is it right for me to project my worldview onto another person? No, it's not. Like, our job is to help you figure out where you want to be and what you want to do with this, and then, start moving forward, start going through this, start figuring out where you want to go and what you want to do. Methadone is notoriously more difficult to come off of than Suboxone. It's, the stories and the things that you'll hear about that can also, sometimes true, sometimes not true. My first exposure to working was, I was a dyed-in-the-wool NA guy. Okay, so I get in a car accident in 1999. in Western Pennsylvania, like ground zero for don't let them feel pain, right? Like every doctor was being told don't let anyone feel pain. Purdue Pharma was all through Western PA, Eastern Ohio, in West Virginia, that kind of thing. I walk out of the emergency room with like 120 Darvocet. I'll never forget. Little pink pills, man. And I get in the car, I get them filled. I remember my wife saying, like, this isn't good. Oh, it's a doctor. What are you talking about? Right? It's a doctor. And just these things just grab a hold of me like nothing I've ever experienced before. Just vicious as could be. You know, and boom, they're like all over me, and it's scrambling and going from doctor to doctor to doctor, not even knowing what the heck hit me or what the heck was going on. Then I go to rehab, and I get clean through NA, and it was all this like, you're not clean if you're on anything, right? And I bought into that stuff for years, man. And but probably about 3 or 4 years in, I started to work with pregnant women. I went back to school, became a therapist, and I started to work with pregnant women. And I saw methadone. It went from being like this thing to like this life-saving thing that I saw change so many people's lives. I don't care what anyone says. I'm talking like changing women's lives, even beyond the baby. Do you get where I'm coming from? Finally able to have a day where she felt good about herself. Does that make sense? All the terrible stuff that was going on for her to support her habit, and all the terrible stuff around stealing, it went away, and she was finally able to sit down and talk with me about something other than I suck. Do you guys get that? And start to put a plan together for life, and it changed my opinion on it. I was like, this is okay. This is okay. If it is a medical problem, this has to be part of the conversation. It doesn't mean everybody will do great on it, though, either. That's the other thing. It's like anything else. Not everybody should be on it. The biggest pitfalls, and you won't be able to do anything about this, your daughter's in North Carolina. She needs to watch out for this, and she needs to make sure that she's checking herself. You still will have thoughts on doing other things. You guys get that part? Like, it doesn't take away the desire to party. It takes away the desire to get high on opioids. Are we getting that part? You want to do cocaine, that's still going to be there. You like to smoke methamphetamine, that's still going to be there. You like to drink, that's still going to be there. This doesn't take away the desire to do drugs. This takes away the desire and the withdrawals surrounding opioids. And so people need to understand that there's still a recovery program, typically for most people, because a lot of people use multiple things, right? Poly drugs, all kinds of different stuff. And so you still, are you going to go to a meeting? Are you going to go to a therapist? Where are you going to get your support to help you with the other stuff? This doesn't get talked about. It's not like you don't have single drug presentations. If you look at like overdoses, for example, very rarely is it only opioids. It's opioids and benzos. It's opioids, cocaine, benzos. And so the deal is, like, we like to party, all right? We prefer opioids, but we're still going to use this other stuff. And who's going to talk to your loved one about that part of the equation? Because this doesn't solve that part of the equation. And that's where she would need some support. That's where it goes beyond just the doctor giving them the medication. How do you do that? And how do you encourage her to do that? You got to be careful. Your mom, you can try to push on her with that, and she's going to tell you how you don't know. And sometimes people will run the other way. Anybody have any advice in that area, on that part of the conversation? Should you say, so if you're dealing with that, if you're dealing with opioids, should you say anything? Should you let it ride? How do family members approach that? Anybody have any thoughts? There's no right or wrong answer for sure, right?
It seems like you would ask the individual if they were, make sure that they're getting all the information up front, that they don't go into something like that thinking they're not ever, most people who are approaching that know that Suboxone is still a narcotic and still has those tendencies, not that it's just some magic thing that you take it and if you don't take it or you miss your dose or you can't come up with $300 to get to your doctor and you're taking it as prescribed and haven't rationed it to make it last, if you don't make it, you are going to withdraw.
And it'll be bad.
It's going to suck.
Yeah.
Really badly.
Yeah.
So just to be honest, I would want to make sure that whoever my person was fully aware of all of the circumstances and had all of the information to make an informed decision and not jump into something that they get stuck with a medicine that works, that they like, that they can't continue or aren't capable or fortunate enough to be able to continue. And then
Or a medicine that you take the right way, but
Yeah.
you mix it with other stuff because you like the way you feel whenever you mix like benzos and subs, which is a very common kind of combination because there's a synergistic effect. So but the problem is, how do you even talk to them about this? And this goes way beyond opioids. How do you talk to your loved ones about these issues? Because what happens whenever y'all bring it up? They get defensive. They tell you don't know what you're talking about. So you have to feel like, what's your personal philosophy around this? People always ask, should I say something? Should I not say something? So I can tell you what my personal take on this is, and I guess by extension to a certain degree favor Greenville's take, but I also don't tell the coaches that they have to think this way. This is more what I developed kind of like in my private practice, was very much, I told family members, you should be able to ask any question you want to ask. And you should be able to like make any suggestion you want to make. This is a disease. This is a healthcare issue. And if you love your husband, your wife, your daughter, and you want to, not that you have to, you get that part? I'm not saying you have to. And you want to find out about, hey, do you know what some of the other risks are? That is an appropriate question. There's no question that is an appropriate question. However, there is a fine line between an appropriate question and nagging, okay? Right? It can go from I'm asking an appropriate question to I'm badgering, all right? How does that happen? Well, when you ask 15 times, when you hammer text the same question 15 times in rapid succession, you've now crossed the line into something else. You know what I mean? Like when it goes from do you know to this other, I'm trying to control the situation. When it goes from an inquiry to I want you to do this, you've now moved from the role of mom or wife into the role of case manager. But think about it. Other diseases, family members are allowed to know, right? If I have cancer and I need to go to chemotherapy treatment 3 times a week, whatever it might be, my wife is going to want to know. And I should be okay with that. We're dealing with a psychological issue that makes a lot of people push back on us, though. But my official take would be it's okay to have the conversation. You don't know if you're the only one who's going to give the information. Be prepared, though, for the person to do what? I know that already. What are you talking about? You're not an expert. That kind of thing. All that stuff that we say when we're in active addiction. Here's what's interesting. Everything that my wife said to me when I was in active addiction, I did know, and I knew that she was right. Okay? Does that make sense? Every single thing, I already knew it. I knew she was right. I never once acknowledged that I knew she was right. Okay? Not once. And every single time I eventually made her question her own sanity around that issue. So she would have been better off not asking me. Does that part make sense? So when I say that, you have to look at your individual situation and say, what am I dealing with? Because when she would start down the road, like these prescription drugs guys, my father had an issue with prescription drugs before having an issue with prescription drugs was cool, right? Like back before it became an epidemic, it was an issue in our house. And so my wife knew very well that this was not a good idea. Like when I took 3 of these things when I was supposed to take 1, on day 1, and I told her it was because my neck hurt, she 100% knew I was full of it, right? But I never allowed that to come in, and I would twist it on her about being judgmental, about thinking that she knows more than she knows, about who do you think you are? And you know that. Do you know more than the doctor? You guys get? And I would say it, and I would say it over and over again to the point where she would literally be like, maybe he's right. So what I'm telling you is if you go there with your eyes wide open and understand that like you might not get the most rosy-like response. People aren't going to necessarily, but it is okay to share information, and many times you may be the only one sharing information. Who else would have some advice around talking about it or I guess having the conversation about getting help, however you want to think about it?
Well, I think you really hit on it about when you're on the subs, don't make that the only thing, because our daughter was on subs, she was on methadone, And she did great at first, and got off everything, and I don't need this anymore, I'm doing great. Well, as time went on, she's not doing anything else.
She wasn't
Yeah.
going to see
Going to
anybody,
meetings,
going
she's
to
not
meetings.
talking to anybody, she's just getting her subs at the Carolina Treatment Center, take it every day,
Yep.
and so getting them to keep on doing all the other things would be huge.
And if you look, so think about it like this, like, okay, partial agonist, Suboxone. Taking it the way you're supposed to is not getting you high. This is the other thing, so it doesn't actually get you high. If you're dosed the right way, if you're dosed too high, you might get an effect. But so let's pretend there's a scale of 1 to 10, and 10 is just like euphoria, all right? And this stuff, instead of having you at a 2, it has you at a 5, all right? But we got to remember that, like, those of us who became addicted, partly because we don't know how to deal with being at a 5. And when stressful situations come up, and when frustrating situations come up, and when sadness comes up, we are still going to be drawn to a chemical solution. And that's where, if you don't have someone talking to you about that, you are going to go, and I cannot tell you the number of times that I've seen people shift drugs to another substance that is completely the opposite of the opioid experience. So there's definitely, you ever hear the term drug of choice?
Yeah.
It's a little bit misleading, and I imagine that there are some people who say, like, this is my drug of choice, or opioids, but very rarely, if you kind of cross the line into addiction, a lot of folks would say, like, okay, opioids were my drug of choice, but that really means, like, that's what they were doing toward the end. And really, like, my drug of choice is altering my mind. Does that make sense? My drug of choice is, I don't like the way I feel right now, I want to feel different. So it could be opioids, it could be methamphetamine, it could even be alcohol, it could be, believe it or not, marijuana. Now, I know marijuana is not a drug because it comes from the earth, like a goat or an apple.
How about Pam cooking spray?
What?
Pam cooking spray in a bag.
Oh, okay, there you go. That's one. Licking a cane toad is another one. You know, like whatever it might be. You know, there are toads that can get you high, Lee. If you didn't know that, you missed out. So, which really is weird if you think about the first person who figured that out.
Yeah.
That's what you like do, like a mental exercise, and somebody figured out that licking toads got you high. That means he was a toad licker. So you guys think, like, if you don't learn anything tonight, you learn that, right? But if you think about it, though, if you think about the common theme of, like, how much do you get involved and how much do you not get involved, and what are your guidelines, your personal guidelines for that? I think that's what's important, because you don't want to become involved to where it stresses you out and it makes your life worse, because the person gets angry at you and now you feel like you're working harder than they are. But you are allowed to get involved and you are allowed to ask questions. So you have to sort of set your own personal boundaries around those issues. There are some people who get to a point where they literally say, I cannot talk to you about this issue. I do not want to know anything about it. I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to ask. I don't want you to tell. That's perfectly fine too. What are the things that get a person to that issue? How do you get to that point in time? Anybody have any thoughts? First of all, is anybody there where they just don't want to hear about it and I'm detached completely? Anybody there? You are?
We are there.
Yep. And what got you there?
It was, you don't understand. It was the constant that, we want better for you.
Yeah.
I'm good where I'm at.
Yep.
And it was bad. It got to the point that it was just better to let that lie and just have life.
Yes. Yep. And just do life and do what's coming next. And so here are some common factors that you'll hear. First of all, the amount of time you've been dealing with it has a lot to do with it. If you've been going through this for 20 years, you're more likely to be worn out and kind of saying, I'm done. If you're new to this and you've just discovered this issue, you're likely to be putting up with it. If the person is, aggressive and mean, you know what I mean? Like, people can get really, really mean in the middle of addiction. They can get really mean verbally. They can sometimes get physically mean. If the person is stealing from you and damaging your property, like, a lot of that stuff gets you to the point where you'd be worn out quicker than the other way. That kind of thing. One of the interesting things about my personal experience in recovery and getting involved in Favor Greenville and doing these groups is the cool thing about doing these groups is, this isn't a therapy group. This is come when you can, come if you will. I feel like you get really honest information from people, a lot of parents in here, and it really has me reflecting on what it must have been like for my mom to have to deal with me. So like, I'll call my mom on the way home and be like, Mom, I just want to let you know I'm sorry. All right. And she'll be like, oh, it's Monday night, you must have had family. Right? Because when you're the person who's addicted and you're in it, you have no clue. Even though it's obvious in retrospect, but you have no clue what you're doing to the people around you. You might have moments where you sort of intellectually ascend to it and you say like, yeah, that's not cool. But you really aren't able to go there because your brain, you're not rational. Do you guys get that? You're unable to like do the abstract thinking and see like, this is what I'm doing to my mom. And she hasn't slept in, 4 days. And you just do your thing and it's almost automatic pilot, completely unconscious. And you don't know, like, you have no perspective on what it's like to be in her shoes until you get a little bit of time. And then I ask her questions all the time. I was just in Pittsburgh like 2 weeks ago. I got to fly up, Thursday night. We'll go out to dinner and I'll ask her questions about like, when I left, like on a Friday, like, what was it like? What did you do? You knew, because I was off the chain, man. I'm gonzo. Like, I'm out. Like, you don't know where I am. And so, she would say stuff like, well, you got to remember, I had no choice but to like basically pray and let go. Because I couldn't call you on a cell phone. I couldn't, call your friends. I had I got a tracker on my daughter's phone, right? Like I can tell you where my daughter is at any given time. That wasn't what it was like in 1986. It was like, good luck. But here's what's interesting. She would still have these nights where she would call the morgue and she would call the state police and she would call all the hospitals around. And I'm like, wow, I did that to you over and over and over again with no consciousness around it. Does that make sense? With no awareness. And if she said something to me, I got mad at her about saying something. Now, I have to tell you, I'm a reasonably sane person. Okay? If you talk to most people, I'm reasonably sane. I'm within a normal range of humanity. Okay? I cannot believe I acted that way. Do you guys get that? I literally, sitting here 19 years later, cannot believe that I treated her that way. I look at it and I think to myself, like, how did you even, like, how did you do that? I cannot conceive me, even if you said, I'll give you $1,000, go in there and treat her that way. Do you guys get it? I don't even think I could. So I want to get you in touch with a couple things. Like, it's not about whether a person loves you or not. It's not about that at all. It's you are literally twisted inside and out in your rational thinking in a manner that makes it impossible for you to act within your own character, if that makes sense. Good people do bad things. Nice people treat people horribly because we literally are unable to access that part of our brain that even allows us to evaluate our own behavior. And then the second thing is, and then therefore, you have to be careful on how you handle yourself with that person, right? Because if that's the case, you're not going to guilt the person into any behavior. You're not going to debate them into. You have to start looking inward and say, how do I protect myself? Because that's the only thing that we can respond to when we're in the middle of that situation. Until we get a little bit of time, right? Until we get a little bit of time and we're able to step back and our brains kind of come back online and it's sort of like, it's like the light starts flickering and then it comes on. Then you can sit and say, that was ridiculous, right? That was ridiculous. Go win the lottery and buy your mom a house or something, right? You got to do something. In 12-step programs, we talk about amends, right? It's about, let me take responsibility now that I'm sane and I can actually see what I was doing to say I'm sorry. But in the middle of it, guys, it's almost impossible. You guys get that? So this is where you have to be super strategic, and it sounds cold. It sounds like very, very crass to tell you. You have to think of it almost like a business plan or a strategy session on, here's what I'm dealing with, how am I going to respond? and try not to react from emotion, and try not to react from, it's easier said than done, but do you get the rationale behind it?
Well, we would always rationalize with her like we see it. So
Yeah.
we're seeing it in a normal, like there's something, you need help. I don't need no help. Yes, you do.
Yeah.
And that was just like, I mean, we did that for years.
Right.
It was just like a waste of time.
You can't have a rational conversation.
Right,
with
exactly.
an irrational person.
Right, so, but you're trying to rationalize in your mind, this ain't right, this ain't normal. But now to her, that was perfectly normal. And she said that the only thing she cared about was the drug. The
Yes.
drug, how am I gonna get the drug? That was the only thing that she would think about.
Yeah, and when you're in it, that is your reality. So the lie that you're telling that you believe is true. Does that make sense? I say it all the time. I could have passed a lie detector test. Because for me, it was the real world. And this is where it's different than just heavy party. It's different than I just want to have a good time. It's different than just risky use. Risky use is a problem anyway. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, the people who are going at it and partying too hard, people die all kinds of different ways. So I'm not minimizing that, but I'm telling you, once your brain shifts, it's this really like bizarre next level kind of world where you believe that the sky is red. You know what I mean? You believe that black is white and 2 + 2 = 18. And if you sit there with me, I will explain to you how 2 + 2 = 18. And if you listen, you will come away well, look, it's the third Monday of the month, and anytime it's the third Monday of the month, you add 30 and you subtract 12, and then you add, and if you know that, and if you don't know that, that's your fault. It's not my fault you don't know that. And let me talk long enough, and I'll have you believing up is down and left is right. And I will not even be consciously doing it. I will be doing it on automatic pilot. So you can't even get mad at me about it when I'm in the middle of it is a waste of your time. That's the other thing. Go ahead and get mad. It means nothing as well. Until what? I slow it down a minute, and whatever you want to call it, I stabilize, I get 30 days, 60 days, 45 days, I don't know, maybe for some people 2 weeks. Maybe I get stabilized on medication, and my brain kind of calms down enough that I can start looking at what's going on. And I can maybe then have a rational conversation about where I'm going to go and what I'm going to do. As you guys go through your situations and what you're dealing with, that's what you have to assess. You guys know it. Families tell me all the time they can tell where their loved one's at in this process based on text messages, based on how they talk to them. You know where they're at. And if they're at that point that of no return, of insanity, don't go there with them. Back off. If you start the conversation with your daughter and she kind of starts lighting you up, I say you back off, man. And then you start saying, what are my boundaries and what do I deal with and where do I put up with and what am I going to be able to, talk to her, not see her, whatever it may be. Again, when I think about like kind of what is the one boundary where it's probably the most serious is you'll see people say like you have to move out and I can't talk to you until you're ready for help. Does that make sense? That's kind of like the extreme end of it. And there's a bunch of stuff in between. You can't live here, but I'll meet you for lunch. You can't live here, but I'll take phone calls. Like there's a lot of steps in between, but you have to honor yourself through that process. What gets in the way of doing that? What keeps family members? How was I able to keep my mom on the hook? I mean, other than my charisma and personality. How else? You guys didn't get that joke?
So, talk to me or talk to us about, all right, so your loved one's in recovery, right?
Yep.
There's a shift, especially when there's two spouses, where the boundaries start to want to shift.
Yeah.
Okay, well, they've been doing so well. Let's start shifting the boundaries. And then you kind of know those hard boundaries to keep, but letting other things shift back and forth. It seems, especially, that causes internal conflict.
Yes.
So that's another thing that
Yeah, so it's a great question, and it comes up a lot. So the first thing we say is that it is, okay to shift boundaries. What we typically say, though, is that there's usually more than one party involved a lot of times in boundaries, and you shouldn't shift anything unless you talk it through. So there should be no like unilateral decisions to change whatever the expectations are. But you do have the ability at any point in time to say, we were saying this, we can change this a little bit. So that's the first thing. The details of that are very, very important. How long have things been going okay? There are some interesting things though. So one of the things, I think it's on this. Let me go to this slide and see if I can find it. We talk a lot about, and I don't know what the particulars are of the issue, but one of the things we'll do a lot with family members, what I used to do a lot in individual sessions, I would talk about this slide, because what happens is a lot of times is people they get good momentum, and they start doing the right thing with recovery, and family members start to change. What this indicates, though, is how important it is to do recovery over time. And what this says is so what you have is you have stress level. And so when a person gets into recovery, their stress level goes way down. But as time goes by, and if you follow this out, I couldn't fit it on, it goes almost up as high as it was. As time goes by, stress starts to go back up, okay, for the person. And this is quality of life, same thing. As they first get into recovery, quality of life goes up, same deal, and then over time it starts to go down. This has been called the wall. This has been called the pink cloud. This has been called, people hit a wall in recovery, and this is why you hear people say you've got to be looking at a long-term process. And why we encourage family members to stay involved in group literally for years, because this is where people quit. Does that make sense? Like, everybody is celebrating that Rich is clean. He hasn't stolen grandma's pills. He hasn't thrown up on anybody at a holiday. He is a great guy. Everybody's throwing a parade for me, right? But then all of a sudden, like, life comes back. And people expect you to, be like the rest of them, right? Start to have stress starts to come back. And if the boundaries aren't there, and I've been hanging out with my old friends, or I've been not going to meetings, one of the biggest things is people stop their recovery program. How do I handle that, right? So we always say, be very cautious before you lift things. And if you lift things and change boundaries, do it with a full understanding that there is no finish line. And if you feel like your boundary was making it more likely the person was doing recovery, you might want to keep it in place. If you feel like your boundary was protecting the person. So I was a grown man who made all the money in my family, who did not have an ATM card and got a $10 a day allowance from his wife for a year. All right? Now, I was 30 years old with a high level of motivation to get this right. I totally, when I finally got it, guys, I got it. You see what I'm saying? And I was motivated. I went back to school. I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to do this work. So I'm not saying everybody will act that way, but what I am telling you is it was not a short-term proposition. I wasn't coming out of there and she was changing her boundaries. It was very much. And then I remember about 3 weeks in finding out that my wife had a secret account. She had been skimming money and put it in a secret account. And I went to my sponsor, I'm like, she has a secret account. And my sponsor was like, she's a smart lady. So, what was that all about? Things aren't okay just because we stop using for 2 weeks. Things aren't okay just because we finish a rehab. Do you guys get that? This is a long-term proposition. And how do you, as family members, when you want it to be over, you want it to be this is better, how do you stick it out? And that kind of thing. Now, all that to say, though, you will hear people talk about adjusting boundaries. I will tell you that is relatively common. It's just, can you do it in a way where you're still keeping in mind we want to support positive behavior? I guess it depends on what the adjustment is, right? On what the adjustment is. When you look at recovery, it's not the family member's job to run the recovery program for the person, but there are hands down some things we know across the board, no matter what the recovery program is, right? What works? We know that first is you got to get this biologically figured out. There's a biopsychosocial element to it. The biology is things like the medicine or detox. Initially, you get straightened out physically. You guys get that part? That's where it all starts. You got to stop using. You got to slow it down. You get on the medicine or whatever it is, or you stop using your 3 detox, and you kind of that compulsiveness goes away. How long does that take? A week, 2 weeks, a month. It depends on the person. Sometimes even longer. And then we know after that, what are the factors that increase the likelihood of recovery? Hands down, the number one thing is where do you spend time and who do you spend time with? Let's say it again across all recovery programs. What is the number one predictor on whether or not a person will be successful? Where do you hang out? Who do you spend time with? Are you at the bar? Are you around the dealers? Are you around the places that you used to use? You guys get that? Without question, changing environment. Then you tend to get into some other common factors. One is groups. Groups tend to be across the board. People who are involved in groups tend to do better. Individual mentorship or someone you can talk to one-on-one adds to that. Then you get into interesting stuff where people have to have a sense of purpose. So what we find is people who work and kind of get a life tend to do better than people whose job it is, to sit at the recovery house, play Xbox, and hit on chicks at NA meetings, right? Like those dudes, that's a joke. That's not a joke. Like that's the guy, you'll go to the meeting, he'll be like, I'm so spiritually fit, and I'll be thinking like, dude, you're 22 years old, living off your parents' trust fund, playing Nintendo all day. Yeah, you're good to go right now, but wait till you hit the wall. Do you get that? Like, wait till you come back out, and it's like 18 months later, and people are going like, what are you going to do now? That kid is hung out to dry. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to that kid where all of a sudden he's in my office, and he's like, he feels like a loser after he was feeling great for all that time. So, you have to, if we are going to support you in your recovery, these are the boundaries we're going to set for the long term. And if we're going to change them, who can we talk to help change them? And, does changing them mean like we were saying he needs to go to a meeting every day and we're going to back off to 3 a week? I don't think, something like that is reasonable. If changing him is like we've been very, very strict about him having the car and going over to his buddy's house because his buddy's a dealer, that should never change. It depends on what it is. Does that make sense? It depends on what it is. I'm 6 months into this and I want to go get a job as a bartender. I would question whether you support that or not. Those types of issues. Are there specifics? Any other specifics to that?
No, it's just I'm looking at, okay, I know this is going to be a lifelong process.
Yeah.
So, vacations coming back. Make my life easier, not have to go to Spartanburg, but have to spend the night at the house.
Yeah.
Things like that.
Yeah.
So those are things that I'm starting to wonder about.
So is he? Where is he in Spartanburg?
He
Goforth
was
recovery.
at Goforth. He got kicked out.
Okay.
Then he was at Mission Hill. He's paying extra fees to stay at Miracle Hill, I guess.
Okay.
He just got a job at Amazon full-time, hired on, Benny's and all. That's
Okay.
another thing to be worried about.
Well, and so what happens is you also got to remember, like, it can get completely out of your hands too.
Right.
Like, there's a reality of it where there are more than, and kids are relatively young, like in their 20s and stuff, are like kind of like they got to figure it out, man. And then for the parents, it becomes a whole different vibe because then it becomes taking care of yourself in a different way. It's not about boundaries because the person is doing life. It's more about how are we going to handle this? What do we want to know? What do we not want to know? I have a couple situations where I'm kind of like mom and dad, like, are you sure you want to know?
And I think that's a good point because
Yeah.
I don't want to know. Mom wants to know constantly.
Well,
Haven't heard from him in 24 hours.
Yeah.
Oh, what's going on? So.
yeah, and so if you have control over it, maybe there's a reason, right? But if you start to get in a situation where people have jobs, they have benefits, they live in apartments by themselves, there's kind of like, do you really want to go down that road, especially if you feel like you have limited control or influence? What are the ways that you can influence the person? What do I mean by that? I'm talking more in a tangible way, things like financial control, right? Like we're paying the bills, dude, so let's find out what's going on, versus an independent person who's paying, because we know there are people out there living this way, right? They are a mess, but they're getting by. Is that a possible way to do the world? Absolutely. Is every person who's doing the world like that addicted? No. Can you be a mess in many other ways other than addiction? Yes. This is where it gets interesting, as people start to get their act together. But you want them to get their act together. You want people to get their act together and move on with life. But at the same time, go ahead and talk to your typical mom who's, kid's been living at home for a while, doing great, and now he's going back to college. Holy cow. I could do a whole therapy group for that, right? That is incredibly, incredibly difficult. And I 100% get it. You know, is there anywhere that you could go where abstinence is less supported than your average college campus on a Friday night, right? How much of that do you want to be involved in? How much do you think you need to be involved in? And how are you going to do that? And you have a right to have a life. And statistically speaking, overwhelmingly the odds are that your child's going to be okay. Okay? Just on the whole. If you take everybody who's addicted to anything, everybody's addicted to, you know, any particular drug, most people, let me tell you what happened. Let's take alcohol, for example. Most people don't die immediately from alcohol. It's chronic and it's over time. Does that make sense? Okay. Only about 2.5% of heroin users will overdose and die. You guys get this? But the problem is it's more than ever before. Do you follow what I'm saying? Like, so it's more pronounced, more risky than it ever was. But the odds are not that the majority of people are going to wind up dying from this. You really want to know what the most likely scenario is for any of us to deal with a loved one is. It lingers and it sucks the life out of us. Do you guys get that? This is 100% the truth. It's not that it ends in a terrible situation, jails, institutions, and death, which we've been told. That does happen, but that's not the common. What is more likely is it's like, it just, the person does okay, then screws up, and does okay, and then screws up, and just sort of like maintains this like level of destruction that sucks the life out of everyone around him or her. And that is what you have to protect yourself from. Because all of a sudden you'll wake up and you'll be 80 years old and you'll be like, what the hell happened? And you do not have to live that way. Do you get that? Like, you did not sign on for that. Whether, if this is your husband, your wife, or your child, you did not sign on for that. And so as time goes by, you're going to see what I'm talking about. This is where you start thinking about it. You really start thinking about, how do I detach? How do I set these boundaries? And the amount of time involved, you'll see that this tends to like really push people. Like Ruth Ann was talking, like, I got to a point where we're like, sort of, we're done here right now. We can't do this anymore. Well, that probably is over time. You just get there, right? Like, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on. Fool me 250 times. Well, now I'm going to have to start taking stock of this. And you got to let yourself go there when you get there, guys. Don't stop yourself. When you feel yourself getting to the point where you're like ready to let go, do not talk yourself out of it. Don't tell yourself like, I should this or I should that. Honor your own feelings and be okay with that and move forward with it. And also understand that the facts are that you increase the likelihood that your loved one finds recovery if you do that. What's also very interesting is, as people change their response to these situations and start to work on themselves, because of this thing called family systems theory, where everybody kind of like moves together, it increases the likelihood that Rich gets better. There are probably things that you could leave here tonight and you could look at and you could say, I can start to do different with that. I can start to like not pay the bills while the person's using. I can start to not rescue. I don't know what it is. Or I can start not investigate. I'll stop investigating what's going on. How many people in here have been investigators, right? You know, I'm going to stop investigating what's going on. I'm going to let it unfold and try to figure out, you know, what's happening. Not going to try to figure out what's happening. I'm not going to put the tracking device, I'm not going to implant it in his arm like I thought I was going to, right? I'm not going to like put the tracking device on the car. That's a true story there. There have been many cases where mom has put a tracking device on the car. Not on the phone, but on the car, like private eye type stuff, right? So, no, I'm not going to do that, and I'm not going to like make 150 calls tonight to try to find out what's going on. I'm not going to do any of that. I'm going to go to bed and I'm going to try. I'll probably not sleep tonight. I'll take an example. The tracker thing on my daughter's phone, this is 100% true. This just happened last night. I'm looking for my phone and it's right there. Okay. So the tracker thing on my daughter's phone is turned off. It was turned off like 10:30 last night. She's at her boyfriend's house. And I'm like, ooh, this is not good, right? This means what? A, B, C, D, E, F, G. You guys know. You start filling in the blank. Now, nothing, symptom-free, no issues for a year and a half. No reason to believe that that was going on. But immediately I go there. Right down the list, okay? So I lay there for a while, and I'm literally thinking like, dude, you should go to sleep. like the right thing to do here is to go to sleep. This is what is in my head, okay? You facilitate family groups, dude. Act right. Go to sleep. So I lay there for about 15 minutes. I'm like, I wonder if maybe it's active on my wife's phone. So I get up and I go over and I'm messing around and I'm messing around trying to get my wife's phone unlocked to like look and see if my daughter texts or anything. And my wife wakes up and says, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "The tracker's off on Biffy's phone." She's like, "Go to sleep, you maniac." This is what she said, "Go to sleep, maniac." And I'm like, "No, it's just, I just want to know where she is." And so now we're fighting. Okay? So now I'm saying that she's judgmental. She's saying I'm a maniac, right? It's like 11 o'clock at night. I should be in bed. Now I'm all jacked up and I'm looking at the phone. And so, you know, there was a text that she had sent to my wife at like 10:30. So I was like, okay, so she must be okay. All right. I lay back down. That should have been enough. But I pick up the phone and I start texting her. And I start like hammer texting her. Why is it off? Why is it off? Where are you? Do you guys get it? Like, I'm totally 100% powerless over this situation. All right? Now, she's fine. She's okay. She turns it back on. Everything's fine. There was never an issue. We kind of go through it, and I talked to her today. I've learned enough that one of the things that I'm good at is I will own my idiotic behavior. Even with my family, like I'll be like, "That was stupid, Elizabeth. There's no reason." But what was interesting as we talked through it, and we have a lot of, like I'm a big fan of therapy, and we have support people around us and stuff like that. So we have people we can talk to who are neutral. But as we're going through it, here's what's interesting. Why do I react that way and my wife didn't? Okay? This was the most important part of the conversation, is because I was with my daughter when she went off. Do you guys get it? I was with my daughter, and I was the one who witnessed and thought she was going to die. You felt like when she was having that hypomanic episode, I was the one who had to hospitalize her. Do you get it? It's not that I love her more than my wife, but I was on the front lines of that. And what's really interesting is, last summer also, so I had this going with my daughter, and my son, I've shared it here before, he almost died. He was hospitalized for respiratory failure, like all within 2 weeks. And my wife cannot handle him. Because she was there for him. Do you get that? And so the other thing that you can do as you're talking through it is to understand that you know how we say be on the same page? That's impossible. Do you guys get that? It is impossible to be on the same page for every issue all the time. You want to be on the same page when you talk to the person. But you want to acknowledge that your interpretation of any given event is going to be different than your wife's. And you have to give each other room and talk about, why is this no big deal to you, but it is a big deal to me. And really, really work through that and give each other space to understand you're not going to react to these situations the same way. I am crazy about that issue because I witnessed it. She is crazy about my 6-year-old son and whether or not, like, my wife is out of her gourd about this. I hope she's not on Facebook. So basically, like, well, they're going to Pennsylvania for a visit, and it's a year, an anniversary. I don't know if I should. My son had respiratory failure, had to be flown to Children's Hospital and intubated. He was in a drug-induced coma for 5 days. Like, I thought he was going to die when I was driving to South Carolina. She thought he was going to die. They had to, like, literally do this emergency procedure, like people running around everywhere, like out of the movies type stuff. So she's going back up for the visit, and she's thinking about not going because it's the anniversary of the incident, and she's afraid it's going to happen again. Do you follow this? There's nothing sane about that, right? But I wasn't there. And if I would have been there, perhaps I'd be thinking the same thing. So can you put yourself in your other, whoever else is on your team, can you put yourself in their shoes and see how they're going to see it different? You know, and understand that you guys can have a different opinion, except whenever you go to the person. When you go to the person, you got to present the same plan.
That's a great point.
You got to go with the same plan.
She saw more than I did.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. And if she saw more than you did, it's impossible for you to actually get in touch with what that felt like for her. Do you guys get that part? You can describe it to somebody. You can kind of like block it out, and my wife can talk to me about Aiden and what it was like to, you know, go through that incident and how she felt, and you know, and I can try to visualize it, but I cannot visualize it. I do not actually know what happened. I drove up after it had already occurred. And when I got there, he was in a hospital bed, stable, with a tube in his throat. It was horrible, but it wasn't what she dealt with. So, it doesn't have to make sense to me. It has to make sense to her. And when you're going to go to your loved one and present boundaries, if you're doing it as a team, they will wear you down if there's any cracks and if there's unspoken animosity between people. You know what I mean? And there's this lack of acceptance. You got to give yourself a break. You just got to give yourself a break with this, whether you're a spouse or a mom or a dad or whatever. This is not about doing it right or doing it wrong. This is
I
just,
won't be mad at my husband tonight when I'm wide awake and he's.
yeah, you gotta like, I mean,
How are you sleeping?
right. And part of that is personality, and part of that is experience, and part of that is interpretation. But think about what I said about, because I've gotten criticized for saying, statistically speaking, most people won't die. People have been saying, you got to quit saying that, Rich. And that just makes me think I should say it more, because that means that I'm on to something, right? Like, I'm going in the face of like conventional wisdom. But if you look at it statistically, what is more likely to happen to everyone in this room is the person hangs on forever and wears you out. And I bet you, I'll find this out for the next time, you're probably more likely to die early than they are. Do you know, this last thing I'll say, because I have contracts with corporations, and one of the ways we talk about the impact of addiction on the family. Family members of addicted people are 5 times more likely to be in the hospital than the general population. 5 times more likely to have hospital days. Not at the emergency room, in the hospital, for heart-related issues, for hypertension, for all kinds of different issues related to this. That's what you want to start thinking about. So go ahead and kind of like let that play. Be nice to your husband tonight. Let him get some sleep, that kind of stuff. Try to like talk it over among each other around who's going to do what and how do we handle this, and put yourself in a place to succeed. And then more than anything, just give yourself a break through this. So we will be back here next Monday. Whenever I'm not here, what do y'all do? Do you do the TV? Do you do the thing at all?
Half and half. So we watch
Okay.
TV for half the time, and then we.
So next week I will be in Arkansas with this, trying to get this thing arranged with some insurance companies. So I won't be back until the following week. But what I'm going to start doing at group is different. I've gotten feedback on group. I've gotten some surveys that say, stop talking about the same thing at the beginning of every group. Okay? Well, I only do that because sometimes there's new people. But what I'll do is I'll get the new people information other ways. I'll kind of say, is anyone here? And if there is, I'll get it to them other ways. So we're going to start using that differently. If you do watch it, it's going to be different. We're going to go right to a topic, right to different areas. So because that makes all kinds of sense. I talk about that every week, and we don't need to go through that again. All right, so if we can we close this meeting with the Serenity Prayer? In a moment of silence for those still suffering with this disease, and for the family members brought into this no choice of their own, followed by the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the differences. All right, 8 o'clock, you were free to go forward and
Thank you, Rick.
relax.
I want to make